It is Sunday, the 24th of January, 2016. I'm just starting the second half hour of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And it's off to a pretty good start here. Got some people showing up, 1, 2, 3, and maybe a few more. Looks like one of them is just going to walk right by, but the other 2 or 3 look like they're going to enter the church. And then there's the car as well. So yeah, a certain amount of people showing up here. So and of course, doing their very best not to see the sign I'm holding up. So we'll just continue what I call our Sunday constitutional, and so this woman's yakking away to the taxi driver, no doubt trying to tell him that he shouldn't pay attention to my picket signs, as she has done before. I'm not just guessing that, I'm based on her previous behavior. So yeah, they're getting a reasonable turnout this morning, which is good for me, because the more members of the church that see the signs, the better, even though they do generally do their very, very best to ignore them. It's still good that they do see them. If nothing else, it proves their apathy and hypocrisy and complicity in Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct and Unitarian Universalist Association cover-up and denial thereof. So yes, all of these people entering the church, or at least the majority of them, have seen these picket signs for quite some time and have not responded in responsibility to the spirit that bloweth where it listeth, as it were. Just an incredible amount of willful ignorance and psychological denial on the part of Unitarian Universalist hypocrites, essentially. So, the psychological denial, willful ignorance is sort of a par for the course for clergy misconduct issues in pretty much any religious community. But I must say the Unitarian Universalists sure really do an excellent job of burying their head in the sand and keeping it there for years and even decades. So, we had a pretty good first half hour. I did a pretty good monologue about, current affairs, particularly regarding Unitarian Universalist Association's misuse of blasphemy law to cover up pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and also UUA moderator Jim Key's bald-faced lies about Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual abuse in general, and clergy sexual abuse of children in particular, in what was supposed to be a second UUA apology to victims of Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct that Jim Key inserted into his first moderator's report to a UUAGA in 2014. So I'm not sure if I want to continue or repeat the monologue about that. Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't seen this guy before. Yeah, unfamiliar face. I mean, a lot of the faces are familiar faces. I've seen the majority of the people entering the church today before on numerous occasions in most cases. But there's always the occasional unrecognized face, a visitor, someone who's coming for the first time, and so on. Yeah, you can just have to look at how the facial expressions of people to know that, they're Unitarian Universalists. They put on these expressions of skepticism and doubt and so on. Everything on my picket signs is supported by an abundance of evidence. But Unitarian Universalists don't want to know the truth about Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct, perhaps especially clergy sexual misconduct, because not all Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct is sexual misconduct. Of course, the same goes for other denominations, but when one says clergy misconduct or clergy abuse, people immediately think in terms of sexual misconduct. But the fact of the matter is that there's other non-sexual forms of clergy abuse and clergy misconduct that are quite serious. In fact, I'd say some of the more serious forms of non-sexual clergy misconduct and clergy abuse are actually more serious, more harmful, more damaging, not only to the victims but also to the church, locally, and the Unitarian Universalist Association congregations nationally and internationally, as some of the less serious forms of clergy sexual misconduct. So I'm saying this because in the past, the UUA has really tried to define clergy sexual misconduct in purely sexual terms. In other words, they won't even deal with other kinds of non-sexual misconduct. They basically put the emphasis on sexual misconduct, so they don't even bother dealing with non-sexual forms of misconduct, with a few exceptions. If a minister embezzles money from the church, well then yes, they might deal with non-sexual forms of misconduct. If a minister takes funds from the church because he bought into a Nigerian scam, he might get into trouble for that. If a minister plagiarizes the sermons of another minister or ministers, well then yes, he might face some accountability for that. In fact, some pretty harsh accountability from what I've seen. But you'll notice that all of these cases of non-sexual misconduct that are taken seriously by the UUA are cases where the minister harms either the church itself directly or other ministers directly. When it comes to ministers engaging in various kinds of non-sexual clergy misconduct and clergy abuse that affect ordinary church members or even non-members of the church, well, I'm not aware of the Unitarian Universalist Association ever at any time taking such a case seriously. I'm not saying it's never happened, but it certainly didn't happen in my case, and it certainly hasn't happened in various other cases that I'm aware of where people have complained about various kinds of non-sexual clergy misconduct, clergy abuse. The UUA basically just dismisses such complaints out of hand as a rule.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's always a good morning when you're accused of blasphemy by Unitarians. It doesn't get better than that.
Wow, you got accused of blasphemy?
Yes.
Wow, I've never heard that one.
Neither have I until I got the letter from the UUA's lawyer.
Oh, wow.
And it's a crime, by the way. It's actually in the Canadian Criminal Code.
What's the code number?
I can't remember. But if you just Google blasphemous libel, because that's what it's termed in Canada. Okay. And if you throw in Unitarian, you'll find...
Unitarian blasphemy? I'll have to check it out.
I'm basking in the glory, man. Doesn't get better. So this young man, whose face is not familiar, gave me a friendly hello, basically said good day. And whenever someone says good day in this context, I say, oh yeah, it is a good day. It doesn't get much better than being accused of blasphemy by Unitarians. I didn't even mention that the most ludicrous aspect of being accused of blasphemy by Unitarians is that the Unitarians who are most directly responsible for accusing me of blasphemy are atheist Unitarians. So just, truly ludicrous and ironic, and quite frankly, batshit crazy is a term I like to use. Yes, UUA President Reverend Dr. Peter Beyond Belief Morales is an atheist Unitarian. He does not believe in God. He's actually, in the past, displayed some pretty anti-religious, anti-theistic viewpoints. He's ultimately responsible for his administration's false blasphemous libel accusation against me. He's also responsible for failing and refusing to withdraw that false accusation. But the person who's perhaps got the...
Sorry?
I'm talking to my camera.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing my little monologue. I'm explaining the big fat UU mess that I'm protesting against. Okay. You can see the videos on YouTube.
Hello.
So you should watch those videos sometime, Harvey. They're quite entertaining, especially the ones where the SPM police are involved. So anyway, getting back to things, the other official, if you want to use the term, of the Unitarian Universalist Association, who is most directly responsible for hiring Stikeman Elliott barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, to falsely accuse me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel in Bill Cosby style clergy abuse, cover-up, legal bullying, is UUA Executive Vice President Kathleen K. Montgomery. Good day, sir. So, Kathleen K. Montgomery is no longer the Executive Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Association. She retired very soon after I filed a whistleblower complaint against her for making false representations to the UUA's lawyer in the process, leading up to this false blasphemous libel accusation. So basically, Kathleen K. Montgomery, basically left her sinking ship. This is very, very common practice amongst Unitarian Universalists. When a minister or a UUA administrator screws up, they're not fired, they're not disciplined, they're just persuaded to quietly resign or retire. And that's exactly what happened with Kathleen K. Montgomery. To the best of my knowledge, my whistleblower complaint against her was dismissed out of hand by the UUA. They did absolutely nothing to hold her accountable. They allowed her to retire, with full honor and so on. They had a going away ceremony for her. Trying to think which UUAGA it was. I think it would have been the 2013 UUAGA where Kay Montgomery was given this nice send-off, retiring as the executive vice president. But Kay Montgomery, part of her job description is or was to coordinate the work of the Unitarian Universalist Association's legal counsel. So in other words, Kay Montgomery would have been the person who was most responsible for coordinating the work of Stikeman Elliott, barristers and solicitors, litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, which resulted in him falsely accusing me of blasphemous libel in clergy abuse, cover-up, legal bullying. That was clearly intended to cover up and hide such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers, as I said earlier, to borrow two choice phrases from his useless cease and desist demand letters. And what's interesting is that Kathleen K. Montgomery had a very long career as the executive vice president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and even before that she was fairly high-ranking administrator. So she'd been with the UUA for a long time and in a very influential position for at least a quarter decade, if not longer. Actually, I think it's more like 30 some odd years. Off the top of my head right now, I cannot remember the exact year when Kay Montgomery became the executive vice president of the UUA, but I believe it was either in the late 1980s or very early 1990s. And one thing I'm quite sure about is that Kay Montgomery was the executive vice president of the Unitarian Universalist Association when Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was charged with the rape of teenage Tibetan refugees who he had lured away from their families in India with promises of a better life in America. And the reason I mention this is because there was an attempt to prevent Reverend Mac Mitchell from facing accountability for that.